Good afternoon. How are we doing today?
Good afternoon. Fine, thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good
I'm a little
afternoon.
I'm a
Good
little
afternoon.
concerned by our attendance. Are we, is there something going on? Are we shorthanded or folks just decided that my class doesn't matter because I don't take attendance?
I don't know, sir.
I'll give them a few more minutes. Maybe they're just late.
Okay, well, we'll give it a couple of minutes. While we're doing that, I'll go over an administrative issue. So let me preface this by saying, I'm going to say some things that I think are true about your experience on e-learning. If they are not true, I do not want you guys to spam the chat or to send me a lot of emails telling me that it's not true. I would like Mr. McBurney, as the class representative, to email me and tell me that it's not true. Okay, that's it. So if what I am about to describe does not match your experience, talk to Mr. McBurney and have him communicate with me. Okay, I have to get to a point where I'm not getting 40 copies of the same message from you guys. And so to do that, I have to say, okay, one person communicates. I think I have set things up on e-learning so that you can see your score on the midterm exam. I am not finished reviewing scores. There's about a dozen of you who I still have to go over your exams. I will get that done tomorrow so that it's over and done with. But for everyone, the score that you will see on e-learning, the score that I talked about a couple of weeks ago where e-learning undercounts your score. So when you see your score, I want you to multiply it by 2 for the issues that e-learning had with calculating the grade. So that's the actual score that you received from the exam. Then I want you to add 10 more points for the questions that I'm throwing out because I've concluded that they were bad questions and that they shouldn't count for you, that everyone should just get those marks. Once I post the overview document that sort of explains the answers to each question and sort of talks about how you were scored, that'll be by the end of this week. I will update the scores on e-learning so that they match my calculations and be able to see what you scored on the midterm. Sir, can you repeat, please? Oh, the fetus. Okay. So here is my point of what I said at the beginning of how I'm getting a lot of the same messages from people technical issues, and why I'm saying please do not spam the chat with the same thing over and over and over again. Where did it go bad? One person answer, please. Where did it go bad? Okay. So you'll see a score on e-learning for your midterm exam. That score is half of your actual grade. Okay. You multiply that number by 2. That gives you the number of marks that you received on the exam. Then I want you to add 10 to that number, and that represents questions that I threw out, because as I was reviewing and sort of seeing how you guys were reacting to them, I came to the realization that they were bad questions. Learning, and you look at your score, and your score is at least a 20. You passed the midterm exam. You should feel okay about being en route to passing the course. So are you guys getting anything that I'm saying, or is this
Getting it.
a waste of everyone's time?
No,
I
sir.
understand, sir.
I understand very much so. Thank you.
I'm concerned because it's so. Okay. So the last administrative point that I want to make, and please understand that if I seem like I'm frustrated, that the frustration today is not with you guys. The frustration is with, well, Flo. So it is what it is. The last thing that I will do, that I have to say on administrative stuff, is that by the end of this week, I will have posted for you the exam overview that explains the answers to the questions. And once that is done, I will be updating on e-learning so that your score actually matches what I have calculated for you. Okay. Question in the chat. Are the short answers answer questions seeing? So the answer to that is, if you are one of the dozen students whose exam I have, if you are one of the 120 students whose exam has been reviewed, it is. And please do not ask me which category you fall into. I don't know. I would, but by tomorrow, everyone's score will reflect what they have, my review of their exam. Okay, so Jaleesa asks, is it out of 100? Yes, it is out of 100. But again, you need to multiply by 2 and add 10. Okay, so whatever number, if you see 30, the actual mark that you received on the exam is going to be 30 times 2 is 60, plus 10 is 70. Yes. Question, when do you finish teaching, sir? when my career is over? The answer is this is the last week that we will cover new material. Next week will be revisions and whatnot, and then that will be the end of teaching. I don't. So Sasha asked, what is the question I wanted you to respond to via the year rep? My point is, I do not want to get, if it turned out that I was wrong about how e-learning looked for you, I did not want to get 40 or 50 messages about I can't access my midterm grade on e-learning. I wanted Paul to send me one email that said students can't access their midterm grade. So that was what I wanted. Anything else administrative before we move on? I know we are all very tired because I know I am extremely tired, but we're just going to, we have a little bit more to power through and then we are done. So anything else on administrative stuff? Okay. Moving on. I sent an email this morning that I was looking at the syllabus and I realized that I had scheduled new material for next week, the last week of teaching, which is not how things are supposed to be done. However, the material that was scheduled for next week is on the final exam. So I canceled what was scheduled for this week, which was another week of nuisance, and have moved up the material on trespass against the person. So if you have not prepped, if you are not ready, that's fine. We're gonna continue on as, you know, as best we can. I have attempted to prepare enough material to get us all the way through class, even if nobody says a peep. But certainly, if you guys have questions along the way, you're more than welcome to bring them up as we go, as always. So trespass against the person comes in 3 flavors: assault, battery, and hi, no, you didn't. It's not just you. It crapped out. So, yep. So I'm back. The issue is not, so Keandre says you may have to turn the camera off, Dr. Krell. The issue is not the bandwidth of the camera. The issue is just that my connection is not stable. That Flow is not providing me with the service that I have paid for. So have a question to consider pre-recording this lecture, and the answer is that the faculty has taken a strong position that pre-recording is strongly disfavored. So last week I was able to skirt around it by saying, oh, look, they need the time to focus on their assignments, but the deputy dean would not be happy if she found out that I had pre-recorded this lecture just because of internet issues. We'll keep doing the best that we can. So 3 flavors of trespass against the person, with a 4th that is sort of. Assault, battery, and false imprisonment. Okay. There are 2 things that all of these types of claims have in common. One is an intent component. They are intentional torts. So if you allege a claim for a negligent trespass, right, whether it be sounding as an assault, as a battery, or as a false imprisonment, the courts have held that this is an action in negligence. It is not a trespass against the person. The second thing that all of these types of cases have in common is that you do not have a requirement to prove damages. Okay? You don't have to prove that you were injured by the assault or the battery or the false imprisonment. You just have to prove that it occurred. However, and this is a practice tip, you run the risk of being awarded nominal damages in the event that the court determines that the trespass occurred, but there was no injury. Okay? So, taking these up in order of sort of increasing egregiousness. Assault is a tort where the plaintiff reasonably feared that they were going to be touched without their consent. Okay? Reasonably feared that they were going to be touched without their consent. I like to call this the tort of don't hit me. Right? So if you've ever seen the Producers, actually, I'll just put the clip up on e-learning. Or heck, let me see if I can find it now while I'm thinking about it. Okay, here we go. So let me share my screen with you guys. And share computer sound. So.
You could have raised $1 million.
But the play cost me only $60,000 to produce.
And how long did it run?
One night.
Do you see? Do you see what I'm trying to tell you? You could have raised $1 million, put on a $60,000 flop, and kept the rest.
But what if the play was a hit?
Well, then you'd go to jail.
Oh.
See, once the play's a hit, you have to pay off all the backers. And with so many backers, there could never be enough profits to go around. Get it?
Uh-huh. 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 So in order for this scheme to work, we'd have to find a surefire flop.
What scheme?
What scheme? Your scheme, you bloody little genius.
I meant no scheme. I merely posed a little academic accounting theory. It was just a thought.
Bloom, worlds are turned on such thoughts. Don't you see, Bloom, darling Bloom, glorious Bloom? It's so simple. Step 1, we find the worst play in the world, a surefire flop. Step 2, I raise $1 million. A lot of little old ladies in the world. Step 3, you go back to work on the books. Phony lists of backers, one for the government, one for us. You can do it, Bloom. You're a wizard. Step 4, we open on Broadway. And before you can stay, step 5, we close on Broadway. Step 6. We take our $1 million bucks, we fly to Rio de Janeiro. Rio by the
Mr. Valentine,
sea.
no, wait a minute. No,
Oh,
please, no,
mio,
wait, Mr.
oh, my.
You're holding me too tight.
Rio by the sea. Oh, me.
I'm an honest man. You don't understand.
No, Bloom, you don't understand. This is fate. This is destiny. This is kismet. There's no avoiding it.
Mr. Bialystok, not more than 5 minutes ago, I doctored your books. That, sir, is the ultimate extent of my criminal life.
Whoa! I want that money!
Oh, I fell on my keys.
You miserable, cowardly, wretched little caterpillar. Don't you ever want to become a butterfly? Don't you want to spread your wings and flap your way to glory?
You're gonna jump on me. Huh? You're gonna jump on me. I know you're gonna jump on me. Like Nero jumped on Popea.
Ooh.
Popea! She was his wife and
So you see at the end how how Gene Wilder's character here is freaking out because he thinks that the other guy's going to jump on him. That is an assault. Okay. That is the quintessential form of an assault. It is the reasonable fear that someone is going to touch you without your consent. Okay. And I will post the clip on e-learning for folks to sort of look at their leisure, but that is the key piece of assault. So what is not necessary from an assault is that you actually get touched. Okay, you will notice that although there's touching earlier in the clip, at the point that Gene Wilder's character is afraid, he's not actually being touched, right? The next thing that is not necessary for an assault is that the touching be violent in any way, right? So even if the other character was just sort of threatening to poke Gene Wilder, he could still be liable for an assault. And there isn't any requirement in assault that there be an act toward the assault, right? Words can be sufficient. So when the other character goes, "I want that money and you're going to get it for me," that was enough, even though he didn't do anything to indicate that he was going to jump on Gene Wilder. There's even a case from the UK, from the Court of Appeals of England and Wales, that says that a threatening silence can be sufficient to be an assault.
Explain.
I wish I could. So this is the Burstow and Ireland case, and it's basically like a heavy breathing phone call. You know, when you pick up the phone and all you can hear on the other end is somebody sort of breathing very loudly into the mouthpiece, but they don't say anything. And if you've never been the victim of one of these calls, count yourself very lucky, because they're actually quite disturbing. But the logic is that the key piece of an assault, the piece that makes an assault is not the action of the defendant, but the reasonable apprehension of the plaintiff. Okay. So like someone says privately, the reasonable fear from the phone call. Exactly. It's being made afraid and that fear being reasonable. Okay. Those are the two key pieces.
Would they be mens rea?
I'm sorry?
would there be a mens rea?
No, mens rea is
Oh.
a criminal law concept. In torts, we are interested in intent.
Mm.
Okay.
Because you see, when the guy was at first, as you were saying, touching up the guy and playing with him, there was nothing. And then when you said, well, you're gonna jump on me, I realized his whole demeanor and his attitude changed. So I was wondering if there was a mens rea in there, because I was going to ask you at what point does the mens rea then facilitate the whole conduct of assault?
There is an intent element, but the intent isn't like an intent to harm. It's the intent to do the touching, right? So the things that make an assault are the apprehension, the reasonableness of the apprehension, and the lack of consent, the unwanted nature of the touch.
So, sir,
Okay.
does it have to be? What about the because what you just said to me, the nature of the touch itself, does it have to be like great pain? Like, for example, does the person have to be the extreme? You get hurt, you get cut, is it just a touch, or has to do with the intensity of the touch, or it's just a touch?
If when you were a child and you were holding your finger an inch away from your little sister, going, "I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you," that was an assault.
It was?
It was.
Okay, then I did a lot of that.
Now look, is every assault going to become a legal action? Of course not. The vast majority of them are going to go nowhere when the plaintiff comes to an attorney and the attorney goes, "Look, sure, you were assaulted, but your damage is nothing. And so you're going to walk away with a piece of paper that says judgment, and you're going to pay me a lot of money to get you that." Right? Jade says that would be a technical assault, and that is, yes, that is correct. It meets the definition of an assault. Would it be actionable? Probably not, because it's not worth the time and energy, right? Okay. One of the wrinkles of assault law that trips up a lot of students, I think, is that the plaintiff has to actually know that they are being threatened. Okay, so you know how on in like old Hanna-Barbera cartoons, you'd see the villain trying to make friends with the protagonist, and then when the protagonist turned their back, the villain would raise a knife up behind them. And then when the protagonist turned back around, they'd be like, "Oh, ho hum, la la la, da da da." Protagonist never knows that the assault is coming, and so there's no assault because there is no apprehension. Okay.
So the key thing here is the apprehension of the fear.
The one of the key things is the apprehension, the knowledge that, oh my God, you're coming for me, right?
Okay.
That's the piece that's the one of the key pieces, right? The other one is that it be unwanted, and that it be reasonable. Okay, so that's the other place where a lot of these cases founder is the plaintiff themselves was put in fear of being touched, but a reasonable person would not have been. Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want to take this in the context of a workplace. So, and I want to link it to the sexual harassment law, the Sexual Harassment Act.
Mhm.
If we have two employees, say male and female, and the male decided to touch, was attempting to touch the female in an appropriate manner. And the sexual harassment act said that is unwanted. You just said that there can't be any damages held for that person, but when you go to the sexual harassment act, you can actually claim.
Okay, let me pause you right here. Let me pause you right here because it's really important that you understand the difference between a statutory tort, which is a tort that is created by statute, right? Where the legislature has decided that we will create private liability claims for these types of circumstances, such as under the Sexual Harassment Act, and common law torts, which is a completely different animal. I am teaching you about common law torts. Okay, so I have no doubt that everything that you're saying about the Sexual Harassment Act is correct. And I want to commend you for sort of thinking beyond the materials and thinking about other circumstances. But that's beyond the scope of this course. Okay? So let me wrap things up with assault and then a couple of other, and then we'll move on. The other necessary things that you have to know. So we talked about the necessity of reasonableness, of apprehension, of unwantedness. There's a requirement of imminence. So it can't be like when I was in middle school, the very common thing is, meet me outside after school, and I'm gonna beat you up, right? That standing alone is not an assault because the threat has to be imminent. It has to be, I'm gonna beat you up right now. Okay. The time component eliminates the imminence and makes it so that there's room for the plaintiff to eliminate the possibility of harm. And the last thing that is necessary is that there's not any sort of condition that mitigates the threat. Okay, and that may seem vague, and it's intended to be, because it's intended to give the court room to look at the totality of the circumstances. So, for example, there's a classic case, it's mentioned in the worksheet, it's mentioned in the text, of where the defendant was alleged to have said, were it not assize time, I would beat you to a pulp. Okay, and it was assize time, which, just for those of you who don't speak medieval legal English, assize time just meant that it was the time in which the court met and heard cases. But the court held that because the defendant said, I'm not going to do anything to you, but if it was a different time of year, you and I would be having some blows, that there was no assault, because the plaintiff could not reasonably expect that there was an imminent threat of harm. Okay. I have a private question in the chat. Does it matter where it happens? I was thinking if it is Carnival, you would expect to be touched. Or maybe you guys, maybe in this part of the Caribbean, you pronounce it like it's in English, carnival. But that, I think, is a really useful segue into the next category of intentional torts, which is battery. And like I described assault as the battery of don't touch me, battery is the tort of stop touching me. So you remember, you've got your finger and you're holding it an inch away from your little sister. You're going, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. And then somebody bumps you and you poke your sister. Well, now you've gone from assault to battery. Okay? Unwanted touching in anger is a battery. Now, you don't have to injure them. So if you spit on the plaintiff, or you poke them with a fake knife, or you poke your sister with your finger, all of those qualify as a battery as long as they're unwanted and done in anger. Now, this question from the chat, right? If it's carnival, you expect to be touched. One of the things that the cases make a point of saying is that if you are in sort of a situation where reasonable people would expect to, get bumped and touched casually and without any sort of nefarious intent, you cannot claim in those situations for the kinds of touches that would be reasonably expected. So at carnival, right, you can expect to get bumped and jostled and, maybe gently poked and prodded a little bit, but you can't reasonably expect to be groped. Okay, so if somebody bumps into you and their shoulder brushes yours during carnival or during crop over, then that's not a battery.
What about a walk up on you?
I don't know what that is. You're gonna have to explain it.
You haven't been to Barbados. A walk up on you is in carnival. Everybody just, whether you know them or not, they walk up on you. Walk up is a kind of dirty dancing.
So I think the answer to that is if it's unwanted, then potentially it could be a battery. But I think that this raises a really helpful issue, because one of the issues is, does the battery have to be done in anger, right? Does there have to be some sort of hostile intent from the defendant?
Right.
Okay. And the cases sort of go in both directions. Okay. You've got a case from the mid-1980s, Wilson versus Pringle, where their lordship said that the hostile element of a battery turns on the demeanor of the defendant. Did the defendant intend to harm you? Doesn't matter whether they did or not, but did they intend to harm you with the touch? But then we have a case from the early 1990s, it's called In Re F, where Lord Goff says, wait, this doesn't make a lot of sense, right? The Wilson versus Pringle rule doesn't make sense, because if we say that hostility turns on the intent of the defendant, then there's this whole class of unwanted touchings that basically is unactionable under the common law. And he says that doesn't make sense. What hostility has to mean in battery is the lack of consent from the plaintiff. Okay? The fact that the plaintiff doesn't want it. Okay? And as someone in the chat has said privately, in the Dirty Dancing case, the battery would mostly occur when you make it clear that you don't want the person to dance on you, but they continue to do so.
That is correct.
I think that's probably right, because the idea is that carnival, right, if you go out into the crowds during carnival, during crop over, you are expecting, it's not unreasonable to expect that some of these things would occur, but it is reasonable if you say, or you saw in some way express, leave me alone, that the people around you, that the person who's coming up to you, who is, as you put it, walking up on you, I said that extremely white, that they will leave you alone, right? So I think that that's probably the right outcome, is you know, this is a cultural context where this sort of invitation is implicit in being out and about during the event, but you have the right to, you know, sort of say no thank you, and that for that no thank you to be respected, right? And you don't even have to be polite about it, right? Your no is no. You are entitled to that. So yeah, does that answer the question about, you know, sort of how carnival and
Yes,
those
yes.
sorts of
Yeah.
events come into play?
Yeah.
Okay. The last thing that I want to talk about today, and then I want to address a quick administrative question that got posted in the chat that I wasn't ignoring, but there was never a good time to talk about it. So let me wrap up the material and then I'll answer that question. And that's that there is a third category of trespass against the person that doesn't easily fit into the other categories. And that is for intentional infliction of emotional distress. You'll recall we talked about emotional damage when we talked about negligence, and we made the point, and this came up a couple of times on the midterm, and a lot of folks made some serious errors with it, including me. So that's one of the questions that you're getting back. But in negligence, recovering emotional damages, right? Damages for emotional harm requires either one of two things. It either requires actual physical harm, or it requires psychiatric injury in the form of what amounts to a diagnosis. Okay. There is the category, you know, now some of you are probably thinking there's also the category of nervous shock. Okay. And the secondary victim doctrine. Bear in mind that the nervous shock doctrine comes from a time when mental health treatment was not as advanced as it is. Nervous shock is actually a form of psychiatric diagnosis from the time that the doctrine was being developed. So it is my guess, and in the Caribbean, these cases are extremely rare, so this is just a guess. It is my guess that as that doctrine continues to develop, that we will see a move away from the phrase nervous shock and a move toward the sort of the question of, is there some sort of psychiatric diagnosis? But in intentional torts, right? If you prove that the defendant intended the emotional distress that was caused, you can still recover even without any sort of physical damage or without any sort of diagnosis. Okay.
So how is that proven? Where does the burden of proof lie?
So the burden of proof, as always, lies with the plaintiff. How do you prove it? It is yet another one of these totality of the circumstances, right? Certainly, if you can get the defendant to admit to intent to harm, that's sort of the gold standard. That's the smoking gun proof. But you can still recover in these claims without that sort of proof, right? If the court can infer the intent from the totality of the circumstances, then you can still recover. Okay, so let me wrap up because we're almost out of time with the administrative questions that have come in. The first one is asking about the review of the exams. The answer is, and I forget the exact answer because unfortunately it was in the chat before my internet blew up, but basically it was asking, were marks awarded for the short answers? The answer is, except for the 12 people whose exams I have not reviewed, marks were awarded for explanations. I will, when I post the review document, that document will include an explanation of how many marks were awarded for different kinds of answers. And I'm hopeful that I'll be able to set things up so that you can go back into your exam and see the marks that you received for particular questions. I don't know if I can do that yet, but I'm still working on it. The second administrative question that I got is, there was an email saying we were not going on to the second part of nuisance. The workbook that had nuisance part B has been removed from e-learning. Should I then not cover the part B? That is correct. The stuff that would be covered in the second part of the nuisance is not going to be on the exam. I will post the worksheet for the second part of nuisance. I will post it on e-learning in the block for next week. But it is just for your information and to help you review and get ready as you go into torts 2. Okay. So that's it. All right. So what questions do you guys have before we wrap it up today? So Christy asks, if we have a discrepancy between the mark and the review, can we query it with you? That will be the process for grade discussions will be listed will be provided with the review document. So the short answer is yes, there is a process. It will be explained to you on the document. So, that's anything else, guys? Nothing else? Okay, then we're going to wrap it up here and we'll see you guys later this week. Take care.
You
And
too,
bye,
sir.
guys.
You too, sir. You too.